Is this Tuesday? I don't think it's Tuesday. Daniel, are we supposed to? We are live. All right, folks. Hey, special edition of Cloud Talk Live, middle of the day on Thursday. And you're seeing the pop-ups happening right now. Rackspace is live. We're here to talk about some incredible things going on in the space of artificial intelligence. So as we get going here, team, do all the things you know to do. Let's go ahead and introduce yourselves. We always love to know who is out there watching us. We'd love for you to also tell us where you are in the world. We know this is a global audience. Normally, as we go live at 8:30 a.m. Central Time, our West Coasters, unless they're really early birds, don't get a chance to participate. So if you're out in California or somewhere on the U.S. West Coast, go ahead and introduce yourself. You'd be new around these parts. As I mentioned, what we're going to talk about today is really getting into the topic of artificial intelligence and machine learning, an underpinning of that. And it seems like that is all we hear about these days. ChatGPT this, generative AI that, and it's everywhere. We're hearing about it in the creation of, hey, welcome Patrick from San Jose. We're hearing about it in the creation of images. We're seeing it in videos. We're seeing it leak into, it seems like every application. I've been doing a ton of video editing lately, and it seems like that app continues to get updated on a day-by-day basis. Not with saying, hey, we have the latest and greatest in AI, but their tools just get better because AI is there. For instance, you may have noticed we have our Solve Summit next week, and there's subtitles going across the page on that. Well, you know what? My little DaVinci Resolve added auto subtitles, and it gets everything right. It gets names right. It gets product titles right. All of the things. Pretty darn amazing. So that's right, Sean. It is a Thursday afternoon, and here we are live. So folks, glad you have joined us today. I've mentioned a moment ago our topic, of course, AI. And as we've heard so much about it here this year, it makes us think, well, this must be a new technology. Well, you know what? We know that it's not. In fact, the first term, as we think about artificial intelligence, the first time that term was actually coined, back in, looking at my notes, 1956 by John McCarthy. And really the only people who gravitated strongly to it, other than a few scientists, because that's the type of people who are working with it at that point, they were the science fiction folks, because we lacked a few core ingredients to bring it to reality. First of all, the programming to pull it together. Second of all, data to train these models that the programming would create. There was no computer data. Computers were brand new. And then, of course, the compute power to be able to not only train, but to run these things. Hey, Ed Schultz from Seguin. And so, there have been different waves of we call them, AI rebirth, and then AI winters as progress would be made. But then, because of the lack of one of those areas, it was pulled back. Well, there's been a ton going on this year, and Rackspace is talking a lot about it these days. So I thought, why not bring Srini Koushik, the Rackspace CTO, up onto stage so that we could have a little chat around all things AI, generative AI, and stuff going on in the market. So Srini, welcome to a midday version of Cloud Talk Live.
Hey, Jeff. It's good to be back, man.
Hey, I'm so glad to have you back. Although you just disappeared, I'm sure you'll be back here in a second. Producer Daniel will work on it. It's been a while since you've been on, so we're glad to have you back here. Now, there we go. Camera's on and ready to roll.
Yeah.
Hey, Srini, so, you be the first person to raise your hand when somebody says, have you heard about what's going on in AI? And go, it's not new, folks. Yeah. Take us in your Wayback Machine. Where did you first encounter it, or where did you, see it in history that it was really popping up?
Well, I was actually about to kind of comment when you mentioned McCarthy. I knew him. I'm that old, man. No, actually, AI is something that I've had a passion for right from the time I went to college. My master's degree thesis was actually in 1986. And it was on a concept at that time, again, it's been redefined, but it was on a concept called frames. And wow. What we're doing is you did the 1956 AI being used. 1968 was the first time ELIZA was released, and ELIZA was this the version of a chatbot that where you actually asked questions and it felt like it was doing it. It was basically parsing rules to go through it. And the research I did was probably more focused on, can you get better responses if you actually have context? right?
Mm.
The whole thing frame is that, and that's like 1986. And then you fast forward, and I am basically, I'll give you the disclaimer. I'm not claiming any the pride of authorship or anything on it. But one of the key things that's actually gotten us to where we are today
Yeah.
is a seminal paper that was released in 2017 of a concept called attention. And what happened was, like, encoder decoder patterns had been there. Like,
Yeah.
giving you input this, decoder to this was always there. And what the transformer architecture, which is kind of what transformers is, like the T in your GPT that you talk about,
Yeah. Right.
the transformer architecture basically put a attention module in between encoder and decoder. And what that allows it to do is it allows it to, as you're decoding it, pay attention to the most important thing in there. And so that allows you to do, natural language translation, everything else. And it also started this whole realm of exponential change we've seen since 2017.
Yeah.
Or, you get to GPT-1 and GPT-2, and now we're on 4, and like the next one is coming out. It is just unbelievable and amazing to see the pace at which it's moving. So it's not new, but at the same time, the first 50 years seems like it was glacial, and then you suddenly have this rocket booster kick in.
Well, and when there's been, what's interesting is a lot of the even original thinking, like if you go back to neural nets, and those really became popular in your 80s, was when they were first defined. And there was really the two schools of thought around AI, from a neural net perspective or a decision tree type of a way to go about it. And they duked it out. They fought it out really until the early teens, when it became more and more apparent that the neural net was the way to go. And the gentleman, he comes out of Google who really did all that work. He made the comment also. He says, you tried to train one of those models that we even thought about back in the 80s and started it in the 80s on the technology they had in the 80s. Yeah. It would still be running that original training model today, where now we can do that, with current technology and memory and GPUs in moments is probably too fast, but definitely a lot shorter than 40 or 50 years.
Oh, no. And yeah, it's just like everything else, right? When you think about saving money, people tell you the compounding nature of savings is what's going to make you that millionaire, right? It's absolutely the same thing here. I think what you're talking about is there are several technologies that had to be built which compound on one another. And where you are right now is that exponential growth.
And it's not, and that exponential growth, we think about it as technologists through the lens of technology, but you see the proof points on that when you see the exponential growth in the users, the everyday users of this stuff. I mean, you go back to Netflix. How long did it take them to get to 100 million users? Years. And then Instagram, that was really one of the big ones that was fast. I forget how long that one was, a couple months. But then you show up at ChatGPT, and I think it was a couple of days, couple of weeks maybe. And they're at 100 million users and continuing to grow. But that all brings up a huge challenge for the world, because it's fun to go generate some pictures that didn't exist before. It's fun to go in and ask questions of ChatGPT and even think about how we might use that to maybe answer some questions of the job that we're trying to do. But when we start to think about it through the lens, Srini, of companies that are trying to figure out how they're going to adopt it, Rackspace recently has had some announcements about how we're going to help from a foundry. But that is, we could talk about it corporately and whatnot, but a lot of it spills out of your brain from all of that research that you started and the thinking that you did back in the 80s. So let's put product aside just for a second, and let's talk about how can a company start to think about this process and how it can make a difference in their day.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you mentioned it, and I'm not going to take it down that path, but we did launch something called the Foundry for Generative AI by Rackspace. And we actually spent some time thinking about it and saying, why do we pick the word foundry? Because there's absolutely a lot of parallels between now and when the Industrial Revolution happened. Right? Like if you think about back to that point in time, a foundry was a place where you brought in raw materials. You had some really smart craftsmen who used those raw materials to create something of value using machinery. Yep. It's kind of where we are with generative AI, right? Like you actually have a lot of data in our organizations. The machinery we're using today is generative AI, and you need those smart craftsmen to pull it together in such a way that it adds value to enterprises. And the unlocking of value for enterprises comes from multiple angles, and it's all around can I make people more productive in this
Right.
space today, right? I think as this thing evolves, you're going to get into other phases where, like, we have to start worrying about how many jobs is it going to displace and others. But where it is right now is like, how do you bring out the productivity, right? Like, we all know about what happened with COVID.
Yeah.
Hybrid is the default right now. So everybody's everywhere, and that is not coming back. It's essentially, that's the model of us working. And if that's the way you work, and one of the advantages of having worked in a physical location is knowledge was compartmentalized into that space. You had it within that. You could go find it in others. When you're spread out this way, knowledge has become dispersed. You don't get to know people. You don't get to make those connections. And it's actually really tough to tap into the implicit and the tacit knowledge that exists in the company.
Yeah.
So when you kind of think about anything we do today, that can be enhanced pretty significantly if we have that access in this hybrid mode to be able to do that. So we have the underlying platforms. You have Teams and Slack and all of those things. But imagine you had a smart, subject matter expert sitting with you in that conversation, and you could ask a question and get any answer to that. That's the type of thing that you're going to see in the first wave. A lot of productivity improvements, a lot of things that actually make our jobs easier to do. You mentioned some of those, right? Like whether it's Adobe releasing their magic feature or any of those things, you're going to see those things come out.
Magic autofill. Yeah.
Microsoft talks about co-pilots. Google talks about duets. You're going to see that be this next wave of killer apps, right? Which is kind of what, by the way, when a lot of people ask me, Srini, what do you think of ChatGPT and artificial? I said, you're talking about two separate things. ChatGPT is the killer app that was released on the underlying function. It's almost like you got the iPhone, and that's the platform, and then that first killer apps, whether it was like, at that point in time, I don't know if anyone recalls in 2008, you had this thing where you could shake the thing and it'll run and it'll pick like the next solution. Oh, cool, you could do that. Or, an inch, and it actually grows that. I can actually zoom into that picture. Those are killer functionality that actually made it a lot more useful in what it is today. And just stretching that iPhone analogy a little bit more, imagine today what you do with the phone, with all of the apps on it, is way better than where it was in 2007. In 1 year, you're going to see all of these capabilities come to your phone. And you start getting into, okay, so now I not only have apps, I have an intelligent assistant walking with me where I can ask those questions, I can type those questions, get that piece. So it's just fascinating to live in this world.
Yeah, a lot of the research that's happening in that space is how do you take these large language models that are being trained on gigawatts of power and turn it into something that can run and function on watts of power. And because if you think about, the processing your brain has, your brain processes, I think it uses about 30 watts is how they've measured that. There's no there's no GPT running on 30 watts of power right now. But the really exciting stuff that's happening right now is just like what you said is while you sleep, there would be trillions of points of analysis that would happen against your inbox, against your calendar, against Twitter, against all of the feeds. And you could wake up to a serious set of recommendations personally for your day, and with all of the security that comes wrapped up in that as well.
Right. And I think that it is amazing to think what you can do. Like, and I just sometimes, like with this, I just think back and say 2002, what did I do if my daughter was late coming back home, right? Like, basically, or I had to pay like whatever money to get a text message or something like that. Fast forward 20 years. It's like, I know where she is. I can talk to her anytime I want. I can FaceTime, any of those things. A year, like 2 years in, so like what I'm trying to illustrate is there's just absolutely so many things that come in, which think back even 10 years, 15 years ago, wow, I can't believe I was doing it that way. And it's actually changed the way we live and work. And that's
one of the most poignant ways I've heard that described is the movie Terminator. If it had happened at a time in text messaging, would have been about a 30-second show, as opposed to an hour and a half of finding somebody without any technology.
But I'll be back will still make it in there.
It would still, that would be the length of it. It would be a text message. I'm here and I'll be back.
Yeah.
But Srini, we're talking about all the glory things that come with it. There's a lot of concerns. And one of those concerns we could think about is, and we've talked about it in the abstract, you have this model, you think of it as a set of instructions, but that model needs data to be trained. Well, what happens when that data analysis isn't great? We think about bias being put into there, malicious data potentially being put into there. This is one of the challenges that companies have to think about today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so I do think, like, whenever a new technology comes out, it's the bad actors that tend to use it first, right? Like,
Yep.
so I am not one of those guys who's going to close your eyes and say, like, it's never going to happen in others. However, every technology wave we've had the bad actors. So far the good guys have at least stayed ahead of them, right? Like, as you're looking at it, and I don't think AI is any different. You're going to see some of that happen. The things that I worry about when it comes to this, and the things that I want to focus on a lot more is, if you bear with me for a second, 40 years ago, when automation and robotics and others it kind of did away with blue collar manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
We all sat by and watched that happen, right? And you full cycle, 40 years later, we're trying to rebuild manufacturing in this country and all of those other places. What happened to blue collar workers at that point in time is going to happen to white collar workers now, right? So it's not the use of AI, right? It's really, if you kind of think about what knowledge workers today, it's all about subject matter experts who understand something and are able to kind of use it when people ask them for information. It's skilled professionals who know how to use Adobe to create these amazing pictures, right? Like an amazing, that's what we call white collar in this space.
Yeah.
You just described several use cases where all of that stuff is going to be accessible to, now I can look like a decent Photoshop person, right? With this piece. So that's going to keep happening. And as these assistants and as generative AI gets to be more and more getting into that creative space, knowledge management space, if we want to prevent what happened to blue collar workers happening here, we've got to get our people into those higher level capabilities.
That's right.
It's not fighting about it. It's how do you actually get people into those higher level capabilities? The ability to be critical in your thinking, the ability to make those decisions. Because you asked about the bias, got to do the pre data processing bias that's there, but the post stuff is equally important, right? Because if this data has already been trained on biased data, how do you kind of eliminate it post, before consumption is a second piece of it. So getting human beings to that point where they're operating at a higher level of Maslow's level of hierarchy, right, is going to be a big deal. And I look, it's a challenge, but it's something that we should take on and try to get done.
Agreed. And when you think about I was a little bit younger than you at the time when all of that happened, but I do remember it on the news. But that was something we heard about on the news for several years, didn't we?
Yeah.
Because it was a slow march of the robots coming in that replaced the humans. This isn't a slow march. And so, a word of bit of caution as far as thinking about those higher order jobs that people can do so that they are gainfully employed and have a role in how society moves forward with this. But to that end, as we think about coaching companies along through this role, you've come up with a process, and my feeble brain goes crawl, walk, run. But I love the way you've thought about it, and that is, it's ideate, it's incubate, and then it's industrialize. And that takes us right back to that term you used earlier, and that's the foundry. And that's how do you take raw materials and do it 1,000,000 times a day and turn out something of value. But if you could, just for a second, take us through those three areas and how companies should be approaching this.
Yeah. And look, thanks for using those. We picked the word ideate, incubate, and industrialize because again, it does track to that crawl, walk, run. But more importantly, as if you're an enterprise, and think about it from a user-centered design standpoint, the first thing is to find out, is AI desirable to you? Is it something that's going to help you? Desirability is the first thing. That's what we do in IDEA. We're coming in, sitting down with you to kind of find out, here's some of the use cases others have done. Here's some of the potential use cases that we can do. Is this going to apply to you, and what would it mean if we implement this in your space? Are you ready to implement that? That's what you do in IDEA. Once you get past that desirability, like we need to do something, the next step is to incubate an idea. Pick one or two of those ideas. Don't try to boil the ocean. Pick one or two of those ideas, bring it in and build it. The good news is with Google, with Azure, with AWS, like the tools are fantastic to be able to go build these things. Let's build them quickly, because what you're learning there, as much as learning the technology, you're learning the impact of technology on the jobs that we've got, on the security and the privacy practices. So incubation is all about taking an idea and actually doing the changes that you need to do to kind of figure out what is it going to apply that. So using user-centered design technology, the terminology, the second thing is you're establishing the viability, right? Like, you're fundamentally saying, you're establishing the feasibility of that solution in that place. And then the last step is industrialize, which is, if this is desirable and it's feasible to do in your enterprise, let's make it viable, right? Let's make it, let's industrialize, let's put the right governance, let's put these controls in place to make sure that, you eliminate bias, you do it in such a way that is consistent with your company's values. You do it in such a way that it's not a one and done thing. If we buy the premise that this technology is going to keep evolving, how do you keep that evergreen, and how do you evolve the organization is important. That's why we said, like, look, this is very, very, simple. It's 3 steps, and you have to take it at that speed. And we've set it up in such a way that you can actually iterate through it very quickly. This is not something that takes 2 years. We don't have 2 years. How do you actually get it done in a matter of weeks?
Yep. Now, so perfect. And I love landing on industrialize. Of course, that harkens back to 2 of the things you've mentioned, of course, from a naming on the Foundry side, but then also when we think about that robot revolution in the late 70s, early 80s that disrupted manufacturing, I mean, that is an industrialization. How do we do that for the betterment of ourselves and for our organization? But Srini, one other thing I think that I'd love to chat about, and I think it's really important as a company goes down these roads, and I know it's part of our whole process, but because I was just part of this process inside of Rackspace, it's how should a company go about creating their stated uses of how it can be used inside of an organization. We're just creating some policies inside. And you know what didn't happen? I'll say what didn't happen. You can say what did happen. Legal didn't get in a room with you and say, how many times can we say no? Yeah. But you pulled a cross-functional team together to do that. Maybe take us through that process.
Yeah, and I think it's important, because if you believe that the fact that this is not just technology, this is going to change how we operate, how we work as a company, it is extremely important that we get all of the right stakeholders there. You absolutely want the legal team with you, so that you understand what the boundaries are, and like how far can we go with where the technology is today, and be ready to keep moving that line as technology gets better and controls get better. The same thing, you need your information security team in, right? What data can be accessed? What can we use? What should we not use? And those types of things. And then you also have to get your technologists together, because there's always going to be this tension. And the job is to kind of create the healthy tension where you want to keep progress going, but at the same time, you want to do it in such a way that, in a responsible way, that where you don't put your customers' information at risk, you don't put the company at risk to go out and do that. And we've tried. I think you can always keep trying. You want to make sure that you strike the effective balance, because what I've seen more of is most companies have gone one direction or the other. They've blocked it all together, or they've gone in, eyes closed, right, into the space. And I think it's actually a little bit more nuanced than that when you're actually entering into it as an enterprise.
Yeah. Devil's really lost in the details. And I think what you just said there was perfect. Where companies are either, blocking it all about 100%. We've heard about lots of companies doing that, but there are those that are saying, oh, it won't impact us. One simple use case there. What happens with intellectual property? And you may be asking yourself, oh, what do you mean? I'm not putting my if you're in pharmaceuticals, my drug secrets there. No, but maybe your coders are utilizing ChatGPT to help create some code that now becomes, part of the general available corpus. Maybe not exactly what you're looking for.
My advice to a lot of the CIOs would be like, look, the chicken little strategy is not going to work. Right. No. If you bury your head in the sand, it's not going to go away. Right. If you can't build moats around it and others, this is going on. It's going to happen. And the biggest thing we can do right now is to, first of all, whether you choose to get into this space or not, make it a deliberate decision. Right. Not I'm just go explore it, which is the reason why we started off with the idea piece to say, like, look, is it something that's desirable to the company? If it's not, are there good reasons why it's not? And you at least understand why you didn't take that step.
Make a thoughtful decision.
That's important because this is one that everything, as you pointed out, intellectual property, the impact on roles within your organization, all of that is going to evolve, and it's going to evolve very quickly. And if you get a slow start to it, the risk is you'll never catch up.
It's true. All right. Well, Srini, thank you so much for taking time out of the middle of the day. I know it's a crazy time right now, so we really appreciate it. Jake, I love your comments there about taking a thoughtful approach. So true. Gert, always great to see you. And yes, technology is an enabler, Lawrence. Great call out there. So folks, I'm sorry, we're chatting so much. I didn't call you guys out or recognize you. So everyone, we will be back for the summit on Tuesday. So make sure you attend that. That's 10 a.m. Central Time. Hope to see you there. We're going to get into some AI conversations as we talk about all things cloud modernization. So Srini, thanks again for your leadership here and for coming on and chatting with me about this.
No worries, Jeff. Everyone on the stream, have a great day wherever you are, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Fantastic. All right, everybody, we'll see you soon. We'll see you on Tuesday morning.